This is really such a likable score. Thanks so much, Aaron, for sending this my way. There are a few issues that we have discussed recently, and you've resolved some of them, and then there's some others that you might want to think about a little bit more. Right in here, it's really unclear. Like this is something where the copyist would probably send you a question, or if you were doing your own copying of parts, you would really want to simplify. Right here, you've got a portato, right, which was one of the ways I suggested in the previous evaluation of solving the problem of having a slur covering repeated notes, right? So you get this kind of idea, and I think that that's perfectly fine, and you use it in a couple of places. I think that's exactly right. That's a great way to solve that problem. Okay, however, what's going on here? Is this intended? I mean, the way that it looks right now is that you intend the lower pitch to hold, and then the upper pitch to go G, 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 right? So my recommendation here would be to split this up into two separate voices. It's just not clear enough, right? And then you could even start from right here and just like hide the extra rest if you're working in a notation application that would generate a second voice rest. So go to second voice on the lower note right in here. Change this, tie it to a dotted whole note, and then have these other notes repeating and so on. Because this just looks so messy, right? So you can fix that, and then like the same thing right in here. I would, this kind of thing, tying here, and then what's going on here? Would you intend the first bassoon to be slurring to match the tie below? And if that's so, and you have these other gestures where you're slurring across the strong beat. Right here, you're slurring across the downbeat, and then you're slurring across the middle beat. This being 6/4, meaning that the strong beat in the middle is on the 4, right? It's on the 4th beat. So I mean, if you're following that, we're seeing that in here and so on, then is that what's going on here too? Right? It's like a lot of questions. Same thing here, And why isn't the flute matching the articulation of the cellos and then the violins that follow? And the same thing here. Why is this going slur up, da da down, right? And this is going da da da. You have two different articulation styles, and mixing them like this is not going to help. It's going to make the music less clear. All right. Okay, so some basic stuff in here. This kind of a finger tremolo should always have slurs over each pair of notes. Okay, so these should all be slurred. Yeah, I'm not sure what plugin you're using to generate your sounds, what sound set, but I mean, I think that this would sound like 2 to 3 times as good, or 2 to 3 times better, excuse me, with using Note Performer, right? I just think it would just make the music come alive. So you might want to look into that. Okay, so let's just talk about like the efficacy, right? So like how well are things working according to your scoring? All right, so you're starting off with clarinets and horns, basically covering that that particular idea. Now here, like this is going to be so pungent, the clarinets in octaves and the horns below, right? That just really, the horns are going to be reinforcing that sort of strange intensity of tone that clarinets have, and then the clarinets are going to be reinforcing each other in the octaves, right? So this is not going to be a soft, beautiful, silvery sound. It's going to be more like, it's going to be very reedy, almost like a reed organ on top, and with the horns on the bottom. So there's no need for the violins to be pianissimo, right? if you don't bring up the volume or the volume, if you don't bring up the strength of the strings here, then they they can't be heard. And in fact, in the in this case, the mock-up is telling you the truth, right? That this is not going to be something that is all that, like it's going to be a whisper at best compared to what's going on here with the intensity, right? And then here you have the you have the French horns joining in or joined by the bassoons and kind of continuing on, and then trumpet doubling second flute, right? So basically you are condemning your second flute to becoming invisible, right? So this is one of the things I'm seeing some issues arising here and there, which suggests to me that people are not watching the 12 common scoring errors, right? So this is something that I talked about and I've gone over several times in these orchestration challenges, and that is the inability of low flute to compete against much stronger instruments like brass and so on. So even though you are mixing this sound, you're keeping your trumpet down and everything else, it doesn't matter that the two instruments together, the trumpet is going to outplay even piano versus mezzo forte. The trumpet is going to be outplaying, and especially with these horns underneath here, which have a tendency to absorb the sound over them, right? So the second flute just cannot contribute very well here. Now, if that lower voice were oboe, right? And then you could continue on with the first oboe taking over. So I think right in here you have these, you have certain things planned like handing off and so on and so forth, and dovetailing and merging. So I think you need a hairpin down here, right? Just to say, when does that start, right? Rather than just suddenly going soft in the middle of the bar. I mean, I think the trade-off has to be much more obvious to the conductor and to the players. And the same thing here, like the flute just ending here. So you should probably, just think about how this is all working. Now, having said all that, I mean, I understand that you're trying to do something very delicate in here, and it's a little less clear with the way that you've scored it, but I really appreciate that the calculations that you're putting into this, right? So just showing you where you could possibly make them work a little bit better. Now here, everybody is going down to pianissimo except for the flutes. I think you left out a diminuendo mark. All right. Now continuing on, first trumpet and first oboe. Well, you only have one of each, so trumpet and oboe working together in octaves. That's a really, really nice sound. If the trumpet were muted, right, and then take the mute off here maybe. If the trumpet were muted, you'd get an even better unified sound, right? A very kind of like late romantic or early impressionist kind of a sound. All right, so here you're going da 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 da. All right, so I mean, like here I'm going to sort of withhold a little bit of my critique of like not giving people, slurring across the downbeat, slurring across the strong beat, except for like you just have to decide which of these approaches do you want, right? Do you want this articulation style, da da da, or do you want da da da? You got to pick one. You cannot have both, right? Just like one spoils the effect of the other until finally both of them feel ordinary, right? And there's nothing about either of them that that really calls any attention to itself, right? Which is the last thing you want, right? As an orchestrator, you want everything to be very effective and make the point you want, right? And if that's true, then why are we not slurring here, right? So like everything like really kind of needs to add up a little bit more in the way that you're slurring things. And of course, because like in this case, you have very short slurs in your winds, and they're perfectly bowable by your strings, right? So just figure out what you want to do right in there. Now, there's this one little issue, which is in the original um, criteria, and that was pitch weight in the upper middle register of the piano. Now you have no problems with emotional and timbral progressions. Wow, you really, that's one of the reasons that makes this score so charming, is like you really do move and shift and emerge and evolve, right? So that's all great. So one thing that you do is you add low notes, all right? So I would just submit to you that you have to be really careful with how you introduce these notes, right? Like for instance, right here, you're throwing in a C, right? In the double bass, right? But like, is that really the note that needs to be underpinning this harmony here, right? Just because it's like the lowest note of what's happening in the piano there doesn't mean that as a bass note it expresses the idea of the harmony, right? It might be better just to play G again, right? Or I actually know the answer here. I'm not going to say it, but yeah, but just think about, like, it's okay to add low notes, but just make sure that they don't like detract from the harmonic meaning, right? And then right in here, I feel like you're giving the game away. What's cool about this piece is that like it is heading towards a root E minor, right? But it, like, aside from like holding those E notes and having some E's in the right hand of the piano part, Barvinsky actually does not have any E like below anything, right? So like there's an E in some of the left-hand chords at the top, but in the piano part, but there aren't any on the bottom, right? So he's holding off the sense of resolving on this E. So you're kind of giving it away here by adding this E in here. All right, I like the idea of the harp just playing little bits, and I think that some of these added bass notes right in here are very, very cool. All right, so don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that that you took a bad approach here. I just think that it's you might need to rethink some of these bass notes. This is all cool. This works fine. Yeah, I like the idea of the clarinet and the trumpet working together, trombones and cellos. Yeah, and the doublings in here are nice. I think it all works fine. Just some of the approaches need to be adjusted. All right, so now getting to the middle. Okay. Does the expansion of scope represent an expansion and progression of emotional and timbral qualities? Yes, you tick that box. Do the middle voices have some sort of meaning? Yes. Do you avoid predictability in the treatment of the left-hand patterns? I would say yes, to a point, right? Like, once again, we're seeing harp being used to interpret the left-hand patterns, and we still have that sense of pacing, right? Bum, 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 and just really kind of like timekeeping throughout the passage. So, one thing that I do think works a little bit less than you suspect, and that here is using the tuba. Now, I love tuba, right? I had a word or two to say about the use of tuba in the previous entry. Okay, I just adore the tuba, right? But I'm just wondering if these low notes would be played, with much greater unity and adding more effortless weight to the double bass if they were played on contrabassoon, right? And then here, like, you get a beautiful blend. If you start off with a low D in contrabassoon, and then then the other bassoons like pick it up and so on and go with it. So it seems to me to work together better. Whereas, once again, the tuba has a lot of weight to it. Sometimes maybe I feel it has more weight than orchestrators suspect at first. And the thing is that weight how to explain this. Okay, like you can play a note really softly on tuba, and it'll be in like, you know, some delicate texture like this, and that weight, the weight of the tuba can still outweigh everything else, even though it's playing at the same dynamic. And why is that? It's because it's sort of like adding a bag of sand, right? It's like, you know, you can get hit by a bag of sand and you can do as much damage even though the surface of the bag is soft, right? So you just really have to pick your moment to add low tuba, right? Now, I love the use of low tuba in conjunction to these French horns, right, and the trumpet. I think it's a beautiful bass note for it. But in terms of what's going on in the cellos and the bassoon, a contrabassoon is just much better. And the same thing is true right in here, right? Like the tuba has a tendency to make everything all about the brass because of the way that it reinforces some of those pitches. By the way, you didn't tell us who this is. Is this A2 horns? Is this first horn? What is it? So, like, but by using a contrabassoon, it's much more of a kind of a universal bass when combined with the double basses, I feel, right? Whereas the tuba will bring out certain kinds of overtones in the horns and you know, especially, and in the brass in general. All right, yeah. So who is this? Is this the first trombone or the second trombone, right? Now, I'm not going to get on anybody's case about like, oh, hey, you know, you forgot to tell us if this was, you know, first clarinet or, you know, A2 or whatever, because you know, much to my own humorous annoyance, I edited a lot of that in the version that I was going to put in my lecture series about me orchestrating it, but then I used the previous version that was unedited, right? So it had all these things in it, you know, some tenor clef notes that are a little too low, and of course, like, I got called on it immediately. So I'm not getting after anybody about, you know, having an inferior score because they forgot XYZ. Just to point out a few things, like, though, like if you have two voices and then you are slurring to a single note in the next bar, you really have to tell us what's going on here. So if this is first bassoon slurring to the next note and not second bassoon, right, and you just like say one over this, then what you really do need is just to have two voices there. It's just to be perfectly clinical about it. It's so much easier to read, right, as opposed to an interval slurring to a single note, or a single note slurring to an interval. That's the same. That's like the opposite thing, but it's the same problem, right? So try to split the voices if you're going to do that. All right, so back to the orchestration of this page. All right, so here's another bugaboo, right, which is mentioned in the 12 common scoring errors, and it's something I also talked about in David's score in the previous, and that is, you know, scoring flutes, or scoring a flute in its first octave against a more complex texture, and it just really has very little to contribute in terms of tone weight, right? So what's going on here is we've got oboe doubling the first flute. That is a beautiful combination. And then we've got clarinet being doubled by second flute. And of course, we've got the first violin on the top and the second violins on the bottom. So what's going to happen here, especially when you add on to that the trumpet right in here, essentially your second flute is going to disappear, right? It just has nothing to contribute, nothing to add to that texture. There's, you know, it's playing, nobody can hear it. Much stronger would be to have this as flutes A2, and like you have. Like, it's not as serious as a problem right in here, but it is a problem because of the doubling of the trumpet, right? So, like, the doubling of the trumpet, it just, you know, I mean, even though you're really trying to hold off here and give the second flute some space, it's still, the overtones are still too strong, right? And so we have the similar problem happening in here. So just to save me from having to go over this problem again, everybody, please just watch out for scoring second flute, you know, scoring your flute in octaves and driving your second flute way down into the basement when there are all these things going on, because there are so many things that second flute could be doing that would, you know, be much more audible. Like, what if you had your first flute scored exactly the way that it was, and the second flute was doing these beautiful little back and forth flutters, right? What if it was doing some sort of little trill in the middle? Or, you know, I mean, there's so many different things that it could be doing that would be useful, that would add to it. Or you just leave it out and give the player a chance to, you know, check their Facebook on their smartphone. Or you could have like A2 flutes up here plus oboe, right? Or you could have A2 flutes and then oboe plus clarinet. I mean, there's so many different things you could do besides having the flute play so low. Yeah, so just, you know, especially with, you know, having something like this happen and then having like horns in the basement and having trumpets, or having a trumpet player double at the same pitch. It's not going to contribute very much. Now back to what's going on here. Horns and doubling the violas. It's all really beautiful. Now the horns are going to be like, once again, it's just a question of balance, right? Even softly like this, there are ways of kind of managing this tone. You can mark down, if you want an absolutely perfectly blended color right in here, you could mark down your brass by 1 degree to pianissimo. And that would also give a chance for the viola timbre to come through a little bit better. Now, you don't have to do that. You can also just leave it up to the player to balance themselves down a little bit. Now, I really loved all the beautiful nuances in here. That's just so lovely. So, what happened in here? Yeah, you know, like you could mark some, you know, some advance and retreat kind of stuff in here, and not just leave it up to the players to add. And by the way, you know, if you're going to do this with your strings, do this, you know, underline it with your, you know, because like at this point you're just going da 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 da, whereas here in your violin you got da da da. Match your articulation style, and then what is special about the one will be underlined by the other, rather than confusing the, you know, what do you want there, because without the slur to turn it into a portato mark, you just get very full notes here, right? Which is not, I think, what you want. But to get back to the idea of nuance, right? Da, little crescendo, then the E backing off. And then you could even crescendo here. Da, and a little bit more, da, back off. So anyways, I mean, it doesn't have to just be, you know, kind of a blank slate dynamically. And that kind of thing can like help make the pacing feel a little bit less regular, right? So that's one of the things that I'm hearing a lot of arranging of the left hand of the piano sort of dropped onto the harp, or, you know, just having a very regular kind of a shape to it. And I feel that it makes the passage very regular, right? When what we really want is that beautiful rippling unleashed feeling, right? Maybe there's something else that the harp could be doing besides pacing, right? Because right in here, like bassoon, which bassoon? First bassoon, second bassoon, bassoons trading off. What's going on here? So bassoon and cellos, you know, they are enough. They have the most beautiful, elegant sweep to them. I mean, the cellos all by themselves, right? And this is kind of cool the way that you've sort of divided this up. Da da ba da. Da 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 da, yeah, you know, I mean, it just that's a lovely idea, just really great. And then having the bassoon or bassoons play smoothly. I would say just have a single bassoon trading off halfway through the bar, that kind of thing. So, you know, so it's already poetic. Does it need the harp there? No, it doesn't. And I'm not saying to take it out or whatever. What if the harp were to play an octave higher? What if the harp were to play an octave higher and then end in a roll right halfway through the bar, at the end of the bar? You know, what if there was something you could do to just like mess up the regularity, right? Avoiding predictability in the treatment of left-hand patterns, right? So even though we're not dropping them, you know, like dropping them onto a piano or something, some really similar instrument, there still is that danger, right? I love the idea of the triangle strikes in here. They're very subtle, very beautiful. I think this works, once again, contrabassoon, I think will work better than tuba in there, but I'm not ruling out tuba. I mean, I think it's a cool choice. And then we're getting into this middle voice thing, so let's just turn the page and remember what's going on here. If you're going to go, same articulation. Trombonists eat that stuff up. Their portato is beautiful, right? But I would say that if you're trading off from French horn to trumpets, I think, and you also have the clarinets doubling and so on, that you really do have to back off the trumpet, or the trombone. So it really has to be like, I think pianissimo, really, to make this all balanced together. And that takes us to here. And I'm a little confused because like you're just going da in the trombones, but like the trombones aren't filling anything in. So it's going to give weight to these little gestures, da, and then finally you resolve here in the trombones, like you end up going somewhere on the downbeat. So I mean, it's a cool idea. You did it on the pickup going into this bar, and then right in here as well. But I mean, I still feel articulation style has to be the same, and and the trombone has to be backed off. And I see here you're saying crescendo is kind of meaningless. You just have to mark each instance. So I say pianissimo, and we're ending up at mezzo forte here. So just manage this a little bit better. Like, let us know where we're heading. Especially with like the isolated instances like this, like this is, so crescendo, so the first one's pianissimo, the second one is piano, and then mezzo piano when you get to here. So just like graduate them, right? And you could easily go to forte here, right? That would be fine, and then just mezzo forte in your brass, and then you got a beautiful balance. One little thing right in here, I know that there are some notation software that are defaulting to an X note head for cymbals. I'm just going to speak out to the developers of this software. I feel that that's completely unnecessary. I mean, perhaps it helps in certain kinds of scoring, but in terms of concert scoring, it's completely not needed, right? I mean, it's sort of like the way that the quadruple beam is being used to activate tremolo, and after the composer or orchestrator has worked on their arrangement for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, they don't have time to go back and change them all into triple beam. So so players are getting used to just reading these quadruple beam tremolos. Okay, well, fine, but I mean, is that really, or the same thing with like Sibelius having as a default, when you order up a template, there's there's a key signature on your French horn, right? So I mean, so there are a bunch of things that are just being built into these notation applications that are not being requested by the players. Like, I mean, did any player say, look, it would really help me when you're developing Dorico if you would just put in a, just have the default be X note heads. I mean, I have talked to percussionists who work on this stuff on a daily level, and their attitude is, well, I don't really mind, it doesn't really bother me, but it's really not necessary, right? So what does that tell you, right? It's like, oh, well, I mean, would you do that to a friend? Like, let's say that, like, let's say that, like, you change something about their world without asking them, and then their attitude was, well, I really don't mind, but it doesn't make any difference. So then why did you do it, right? If it just doesn't make any sense to me, right? So look, unless there is some particular reason to have an X note head, like for instance, like it's part of a drum kit notation or some other specific thing, then just really leave it out, especially concert scoring of this kind, right? So adjust your Dorico defaults or whatever it is that is making this appear. All right, so having said all of that, I feel that this really holds together nicely. So like if you were to just adjust some of those things, I think that you'd get a way better color. Like, bringing down the volume of the brass a little bit. You know, really making sure that the dynamic is carefully, you know, and the crescendo is carefully managed. And, you know, trading this to a contrabassoon, it's just like a bunch of little things. Try them out in your version and see if that helps or not, right? See if there's something that you could do with the harp that doesn't, you know, it doesn't feel so much like pacing, and, you know, maybe adds a sort of elegant touch, maybe some more, you know, some rolls, or, you know, that express chords on certain beats, or maybe bring it up an octave, or just like any kind of thing to keep the harp from taking the place of the left hand of the piano, right? That's the thing that we want to avoid, is making the patterns feel like they were directly orchestrated or lifted from the piano part, right? But, you know, having said that, once again, Aaron, it's such a likable score. You know, it really, really made me feel happy to look at it, and I think, you know, this is the kind of thing that I feel brings out the best in me as a coach. So thanks so much for this, and for supporting on Patreon, and for being an awesome member of the Orchestration Online community. All that is so much appreciated, and thanks to everybody out there watching. If you've made it this far, then you owe me a comment below. All right, so please, everybody watching this, have some, you know, some supportive feedback to give to Aaron, you know, some things that you feel would be helpful to him as an orchestrator. Because, you know, there's such great instincts in this, aren't there? You know, just really some lovely ideas, and some great textures and everything else, and especially on that first, you know, the first section, just, you know, some beautiful thoughts about subtleties and everything else. And it's, you know, definitely, you know, there's just so many great talents in this world that are worth encouraging and worth developing, and I feel so lucky that I get to be part of that here in these challenges. So please join me in that. And with that, I'll just say thanks once again to everybody. And hey, you know, I feel like I am totally I am totally on top of it today. I'm just going to go evaluate the next score, and I invite you to join me in that video once it's released.